Hello, everyone. This is Adrian with PrepAgent, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar on property ownership. Hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for the chants. Joe likes to say that everybody should have their name chanted once, and even through chat, it works. I'm pumped up now. I'm ready to go. So I hope you are all ready to go. Let me know that you can hear me, please. Just throw a thumbs up in the chat or say sounds good or sounds meh, whichever. But as soon as I know that y'all can hear me, we'll get rolling. Hope everybody's having a fantastic day. Hello, Joe. Hello, Renee. Howdy, Cynthia. Everybody says good. Nice. We got some good participation in the chat. That's always exciting. Orly hears. That's what we want. That is what we want. So let's just go ahead and start off with some super basics. And welcome to Gene Johnson, first webinar. Donald Prego is ready to dance. Prego, like Italian, like the Italian sauce. That's a good lineage to have. And Cynthia says, gonna pump you up. All right, so let's start with the most basic of basics, bundle of rights. Everybody tell me, what is the bundle of rights? And there's two ways to go about this bundle of rights. You can either let me know what's in the bundle of rights or sort of explain what the bundle of rights does. What does it give you? Nice. Joe's in a chatty mood. All over the chat. Keeping it live. So Lacey says rights to property. Abigail agrees. Natalie says possession. Right to possess. Right to enjoy. And Bridget says disposition, enjoyment, exclusion, possession, and control. Owner's rights in fee simple ownership. All of the above. So the reason this is kind of fresh on my mind is because Joe is redoing our bundle of rights video. That's in process, and so it is fresh on my mind. And congratulations, Audrey, real quick. Passed her course final exam yesterday. That's next step down, Audrey. But back to the bundle of rights. Arthur, our illustrious third wheel in our triad here, Joe, between Joe, myself, and Arthur, found an acronym called REPUTE. So I'm curious what you all think about this. REPUTE, the right to exclude, possess, use, transfer, and enjoy. What do y'all think about that? Does that sound like a good acronym for remembering bundle of rights? REPUTE, right to exclude, possess, use, transfer, enjoy, as Joe just wrote down. Carrie says like it, Natalie likes it, Donald digs it, awesome. So that's going to be in the next video that comes up, and that's probably how we're going to start teaching it, because that's been a really hard one to come up with an acronym for. As Jesus has said, people have been looking. Great, so let's talk some government powers real quick as well, because this is something that came up a couple times over the week. So what are the 4 government powers we talk about? And a lot of times we're looking for deeper definitions, but in this case, the acronym will be just fine. Emma Lou says Pete, Natalie says Pete. Perfect. Mark asks what REPUTE stands for. Joe, if you're still around, if you can throw that up there. I'm going to go on with government powers, but if not, Mark, I'll throw it up there when we finish with government powers. I don't want to confuse everybody. So Veronica says police power, escheat, taxation, and eminent domain. That is Pete broken down. Right? What is police power? What generally falls under police power? When you think of real estate and police power, what are usually the sort of functions that police power gives the state? Zoning. Stacy says zoning. Lacey says how you use the property as far as zoning. Lacey, that's correct. That's a huge one. And what about eminent domain? What is eminent domain? What does everybody think about eminent domain? Looks like everybody's got a strong grasp of police powers. That's great. Lacey says the taking of property. Ann says condemnation. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring this up today, because this is something that gets confused by some people. So as we just said, there are 4 government powers. Eminent domain is one of them, right? So eminent domain itself is just a power. Condemnation is the process exercised under that power to actually take a property. So I got some feedback today, some questions saying like, why wouldn't this be condemnation? Or why wouldn't this be eminent domain? Eminent domain, the answer to that is that eminent domain is the power that allows condemnation to happen. Does that make sense to everybody? Donald says condemnation is the action. Exactly. That's the distinction there that's going to be important. Welcome, Ruby, just joining. All right, looks like we're on top of that. So taxation real quick. What is taxation? What does everybody think about taxation? How would you break down taxation or remember it for the exam? Pretty Pink Jane says eminent domain is the right and condemnation is the process. That's how I think of it too. Pretty Pink. The only thing that could get confusing there is that we generally consider eminent domain to be a power, right? Which to me is the same as a right. But the only reason I don't use that is because it could confuse some people if they see the word power instead of right connected to that. So tax, Bridget says, government collecting money for public uses. Exactly. That's what we're looking for with taxation, money for the government. Some of it for public uses, some of it for programs, some of it for private uses, all that stuff. And then finally, escheat. What is escheat? That is the last E in Pete. How do you all remember what escheat is? Escheat. Nisha says no will. That's when escheat comes into play for sure. And Bridget, who's obviously been studying, says government taking property when someone dies intestate without heirs. That is a great full-on definition. Rachel Ford says no heirs, no will. That's a good shorter definition. But exactly, escheat is the power that allows a state to let a property revert to their ownership if the proper owner dies without leaving a will and dies intestate, says Urelli. Exactly. Awesome. Great work on the fundamentals, everyone. We're going to get into some of these a little bit more as we go along. But let's go ahead and jump onto the board. A fee simple estate is A, an estate of inheritance, B, a leasehold estate, C, an estate for years, or D, a less than freehold estate. Bridget says, big thanks to the program for making this so much simpler. Big thanks to you, Bridget, for appreciating it, and I'm glad we're helping. I hope we're helping, right? My guess is you wouldn't be here if we weren't, so really appreciate your appreciation. A fee simple estate is a little bit slow here. A, an estate of inheritance. So the reason that I wanted to make sure that we got this one into today's webinar is because it's a good example of what you might call a vague question. There's not a lot of information given, right? All we say is a fee simple estate is, and then you're given 4 answers. So this is a situation where, for me anyway, I would probably do some process of elimination. Is a fee simple estate the same thing as a less than freehold estate? No, actually, it's kind of the opposite. It's a freehold estate, right? Is it an estate for years? No, that's a less than freehold estate. Is it a leasehold estate? No, that's the same as the 2 below it. So the only thing a fee simple estate can be is an estate of inheritance. Hope that makes sense to everybody. And we'll talk about some joint tenancy next. Audrey Moore says estate of inheritance. Exactly. The estate can be passed along. That's all we mean by estate of inheritance, is that it can be inherited. A leasehold estate, to my knowledge, can't be passed along to your heirs. Joint tenancy. A joint tenancy with right of survivorship is created A, by a deed, B, automatically if a deed is signed by both spouses, C, by presumption if another form of ownership is not described, or D, automatically if the property is distributed to the surviving children. What does everybody think here? Thank you, Jean. Appreciate that you like the way we explain and break things down. That is part of Joe's genius. At least that's what I'd say. Joe would laugh. Well, actually, Joe would probably be okay with us calling him a genius. In fact, I'm pretty sure Joe's okay with that. But finding ways to break this material and content down into easy to understand bits, it's helped me tremendously. And Joe says he is. Keep it coming. He's good with that. Joe the genius. All right. A joint tenancy with right of survivorship is created A, by a deed. Can anybody tell me why that is? What is it about joint tenancy that requires it to be created by a deed? Any ideas? Donald said, Joe, he's so smart. You know it, Donald. Natalie says, T-tip, that is connected to joint tenancy. And it's actually one of the things in T-tip. But more so what I was looking for, and it's kind of maybe something you don't hear quite so often, is that joint tenancy has to be created by an express intent. The joint owners have to express their intent to create a joint tenancy. Now, sometimes that's, a marriage thing, sometimes it's a family thing, sometimes it's a close partnership thing. Whatever reason it is, you can't have a joint tenancy created by the default of law. And that's one of the big differences between that and a tenancy in common. Tenancy in common can be created by law. So, for example, a joint tenancy becomes a tenancy in common without anybody saying specifically it's going to be a tenancy in common when one joint tenant sells a share. Rachel Hahn says joint tenancy is not made by government. Exactly. So the courts don't create a joint tenancy, generally speaking, and neither do properties revert to joint tenancy as a form of co-ownership. It has to be an expressed intent. And we'll get into T-tip a little bit later. I've got a question about that as well, because there's something else I want to talk about there, but I'll wait till we have the right question. The word improvement refers to all of the following except A, streets, B, the foundation, C, trade fixtures, or D, a sanitary sewer system. L.N. Robinson says the screen is blurry. If that's the case, click on the YouTube window to bring up the little gear icon, the settings icon in YouTube, and change your resolution settings to 720 HD. And that will clear up your blur. Right, we've got some good consensus here. The word improvement refers to all of the following except trade fixtures. Nice work, everyone. We won't linger there. Everybody got it right. But bam! If one uses the words of indefinite duration to describe a lease, it is most likely A or N. A, a state in sufferance. B, a state for years. C, life estate. Or D, periodic tenancy. What does everybody think here? Of definite duration. Gene says he's done better with our vocabulary than with others. Thanks, Gene. We've actually put a lot of effort and intention into the type of vocabulary system we have, and we're always working on ways of improving it. So I really appreciate the feedback on that. It's one of the foundations. In fact, if you read Joe's study guides on the matter, it all starts with vocabulary because it's your language for real estate, right? Back to the question on the board. If one uses the words of indefinite duration to describe a lease, it is most likely A or N. B, state for years. So that one caused a little bit of confusion as well. And I can see why, because you kind of know when a life estate is going to end in the sense that you know it lasts for as long as the life of this person, but it's not a definite date. It's not going to end on a definite date. Periodic tenancy is kind of the same thing. It can be indefinitely renewed. You know, the agreement is usually going to have a renewal date. An estate in sufferance is not really a legitimate lease at all. And so, you know, in that case, the landlord's probably trying to get rid of the deadbeat tenant as quickly as possible. So like Lisa Kuhn says, it has the beginning and most especially the end date. That's what we mean by a state for years, even if it doesn't last a year. And that's kind of why I wanted to throw this one up, because you often see, oops, I don't know how I did that. But you often see indefinite duration attached to freehold estates, and definite duration is one way you might see on your exam of describing an estate for years as a lease. Right, moving right along. We've got two women who own a property together. One dies and the other now owns the property with the co-owner heirs. The two women own the property, A, by entirety, B, as shareholders in their own corporation, C, as tenants in common, or D, as joint tenants. What do you all think here? We talked about this just a little bit ago. What do you all think? Nice, another strong consensus. Lots of participation for those of you who weren't in the webinar yesterday, like Joe said. Even if you're new, don't be afraid to potentially get something wrong. Actively participating in the chat means that your brain's actively participating in this learning process, which means it's always going to be worth your time to go ahead and throw an answer up there in the chat. I'm going to reread the question. Two women own a property together. One dies and the other now owns the property with the co-owner heirs. The two women owned the property as tenants in common because it passed down to the heirs, right? Lisa says, still get things wrong? So do I, Lisa. We're all human, right? A landowner sells 1 acre of his 2-acre property to a friend. He reserves for himself an appurtenant easement over the friend's land for ingress and egress. The landowner's property is A, the servient tenement, B, cleared of the easement when the landowner sells the remaining acre to a third party, C, the dominant tenement, or D, is subject to an easement in gross. What does everybody think here? Now, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. The reason I threw this one in is because there's a lot of different competing terms that we know about, and this is one that really requires good attention to detail, right? Like you really need to read the question completely and make sure you know what it's asking. The answer is pretty simple once you've got it down. And you can see that by the chat that the answers are a little bit all over the place. But watch, everybody's going to say, oh, of course, once we pull up the answer. So a landowner sells 1 acre of his 2-acre property to a friend. He reserves for himself an appurtenant easement over the friend's land for ingress and egress. The landowner's property is C, the dominant tenement. As Natalie says, over the land, right? The landowner reserves for himself an appurtenant easement over the land. So the dominant tenement usually has an access over the servient tenement's land, right? Make sense? Looks like that makes sense. Right, and a couple people there say, just misread that question, and that's exactly why I wanted to bring this up and spend just a minute on it, because, there's so many different things going on in it to try and get you to that simple answer. All right, let's see what we all know about this. Normally, the priority of general liens is determined by the A, court, B, order in which the cause of action arose, C, order in which they are filed or recorded, or D, size of the claim. What does everybody think here? The priority of general liens. The priority of general liens. Normally, the priority of general liens is determined by C, the order in which they are filed or recorded, as are most liens. Can anybody tell me what is the exception to this? What type of lien sort of skips forward in the priority order? Lisa says, thinking judgments. Totally, Lisa. That's one of the reasons I wanted to throw this up here. Because it's different than, as Orly says, tax, and Malou, taxes. So property tax, in particular, jumps forward in the priority of liens. Nice work, everybody. Monique says, FYI, you guys are awesome. Thanks, Monique. You're awesome. You all are pretty awesome, too. Not pretty. You all are amazingly awesome, too. We don't usually spend a lot of time on it, but we do talk about it amongst ourselves here at PrepAgent, how appreciative we are of the great community that we seem to attract. The people who choose to come study with us are super supportive. The Facebook group, really sort of monitors itself. It really feels like a community to us, and we really appreciate you guys for that. And you ladies, and those of you who don't identify. All right, Smoot says, need more math, please. That will happen, RA. The next one we do is going to be a cleaned up, streamlined version of Math Fundamentals, which I did last Thursday. I want to find a way to not confuse people on the fundamentals, and then we'll do a couple others as well. Sheena says, how can I join the Facebook group? We'll post a link to that in just a second, Sheena. So let me go ahead and read the question on the board. The major let me not, because we already did this one, right? Which of the following is an encumbrance? A. Easements. B. All the other options are correct. C. Mortgages. Or D. Liens. Which is an encumbrance? Natalie asks, when will the next math one be? Probably a few weeks, Natalie, and that is because that particular sort of PowerPoint presentation takes a lot of time and work. Oh, Joe put up the link to the group. Thanks, Joe. Much appreciated. So we'll do the next math one in about 3 weeks. And then as we get new ones developed, they usually take about a month or so to put together. But as we get better at them, they'll come more quickly, So sorry for those of you that are having your exams soon. But it is something that we're trying to get you because we want to keep as many people as possible here with us through the whole learning process. So back to the question on the board. Before that, Rachel says, I did great with the math. Thanks, Rachel. Much appreciated. Sorry, Nisha, I know, but it's because math's very confusing if you don't do it right. And we don't want to confuse anybody. We're trying to find ways to keep it concise and keep it simple. Don't know if y'all have heard that before. So which of the following is an encumbrance? The answer is B. All of the options are correct. It looks like everybody did really good with this. Great job, everyone. I feel like there are a couple things I very specifically wanted to get to. Oscar and Susan are next door neighbors. Susan tells Oscar that he can store his camper in her yard for a few weeks until she needs the space. Susan did not charge Oscar rent for the use of her yard. Susan has given Oscar an what? Easement by necessity, easement appurtenant, C, an estate in land, or D, a license. Sorry, I didn't really read that one correctly. For those who are just listening, I will reread the full thing properly for you right now because everybody is getting this right. Oscar and Susan are next door neighbors. Susan tells Oscar that he can store his camper in her yard for a few weeks until she needs the space. Susan did not charge Oscar rent for the use of her yard. Susan has given Oscar a license. Great job, everyone. Sort of the key difference here between a license and an easement is permission, right? A license means that you've been given permission to do whatever you're doing. Somebody says, know all these questions, but still getting 75% on some of the, I'm guessing, practice exams. So a lot of times what that can be is just experience seeing the concepts in different ways. Some of you may have noticed when you're taking a practice exam that if you really pay attention, you'll sometimes see the same concept come at from like 4 or 5 different ways. In the same practice exam, you can be asked about less than freehold estates 6 different ways. And sometimes it feels like, that's a repeat question. Rarely is that actually the case. Most of the time, the reason we're doing that is to give you multiple views, multiple perspectives on the same concept because, we can't really say how it's going to come up on your actual exam, right? The exam providers, whether that be California's DRE or PSI or Pearson VUE, they all hold copyrights on their questions, which prevents us from getting too close to them, which means that, there's not a lot of benefit to us sort of trying to copy them too closely. It's better for us to prepare you for however you might see it. Jean says it's all about reading the question correctly and taking time to understand what you read. That is so much of what this is about. Joe will often say that the real estate exam is kind of a glorified vocabulary exam. And once you learn how to break down these questions into, and understand what they're really asking you, then it really does become just a glorified vocabulary exam because it's knowing what the police powers are. It's knowing what restrictive covenants are. It's knowing what zoning is, right? All right, that's my little rant for the evening. I'm going to get back to the question on the board. Under its police powers, a municipality may regulate all of the following about a housing in a development except C, restrictive covenants. So who can tell me where restrictive covenants come from? What is a common provider of restrictive covenants? Audrey is asking about repute. So while you all tell me about restrictive covenants, whoa. HOA. HOA is a big one. Oh, Joe's going to get repute. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate. But HOA is a huge place where restrictive covenants come from. If you're buying a home in a new subdivision, sometimes it's the builders, like R.A. Smoot says. But it's from privately owned. It's not from a government decree, if you will. Oh, somebody said condominiums. Deborah said condominiums. That's a great example as well. Right. So we are all caught up on questions. Let's see what this one is. A portion of Joe's building was inadvertently built on Ginny's land. This is called an A, easement, B, avulsion, C, accretion, or D, encroachment. What does everybody think here? What is this called when Joe's building is inadvertently built on Ginny's land? And we have some great consensus here. If a portion of Joe's building was inadvertently built on Ginny's land, this is called D, an encroachment. Nice work, everybody. Let's get into, we've got two more. After real estate has been sold by the state or county to satisfy a delinquent property tax lien, if state law permits, let me highlight that, if state law permits, the defaulted owner has a right to A, pay the creditors directly and have their liens removed, B, have the sale canceled through a civil suit, C, record a notice of non-responsibility for the unpaid taxes, or D, redeem the property within the time specified by law. Malou asked for more on finance, and Rachel says finance is tomorrow's webinar. Thanks, Rachel Hahn. Appreciate you throwing that out there. We will have finance tomorrow with Joe. So after real estate has been sold by the state or county to satisfy a delinquent property tax lien, if state law permits, the defaulted owner has a right to D, redeem the property within the time specified by law. And I wanted to bring that up because a lot of people, it's one of the rights of redemption are something that people get confused about a lot. And I think it's important to understand what it is. It's kind of one of those things that even if it's not applicable in your state as far as the statutory right of redemption, most states have some form of tax redemption. If your house was foreclosed on for a property tax lien, there is, sometimes it's only 3 months, but most states also give you a short time of redemption there, right? So Blanca says, redeem the property within the time specified by law. Exactly. And let's get to one more. Oh, wait. I saw the other one I wanted to do. This will be the last one for today. An instrument which usually transfers possession of real property but does not transfer ownership is A, an easement, B, a mortgage, C, a sublease, or D, a security agreement? What do you all think here? Jean asks, what happens if someone else pays the taxes? Most states where you have a tax right of redemption, Jean, only the owner can pay those. A lot of times, if there's a foreclosure sale involved, then there will be an investor, quote unquote, a home buyer, a purchaser, who buys it with the understanding that the owner of the home has a certain amount of time to redeem it, in which case that person, the investor who purchased the property, gets paid back like all of their fees and stuff. That's part of that right of redemption. And it looks like Rachel answered ostensible versus actual. And that's actually a great breakdown, Rachel Hahn. Thank you very much. We do have an article on that as well, and I'll show you all where the articles are in just a second. But the last question here on the board for today, an instrument which transfers possession of real property but does not transfer ownership, is C, a sublease. And I was kind of trying to trick y'all with that one, but nobody fell for the bait. So good on you. Newsdar, we will do law, I forget what we call it, laws of agency? Yeah, laws of agency. We will do laws of agency next week. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you so much for dropping in and spending some time with us and doing some studying as well. That's good for you, and we were really happy to have you. So that being said, tomorrow we will be back with finance at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. And for Joe, Arthur, and myself, I want to wish you a great rest of your evening. Take care, everybody. See you tomorrow.